The small town of Ashwick for Sarah Miller. Her days now were spent with Hope Hands Foundation, a small volunteer-run nonprofit that delivered food, clothing, and care to families in the most remote corners of the county. Helping others gave Sarah purpose, a fragile thread that kept her moving forward one act of kindness at a time. Yet nothing in her years of service could have prepared her for what she would encounter that bitterly cold November afternoon. The team had been making their rounds handing out food packages before the first snowstorm of the season hit. Sarah moved from one small dilapidated house to another, offering warm blankets and canned goods to grateful families. It was near the end of the day when an elderly woman, thin as a reed and wrapped in a faded shawl, grasped Sarah's wrist tightly. Her eyes darted nervously toward the edge of the street where a solitary house stood in isolation. "There's something wrong in that house," she whispered hoarsely, her voice trembling as though the very words might bring trouble. "I've heard noises at night, crying like an animal being hurt." Sarah frowned. The house she pointed to was barely visible through the skeletal trees. She had passed it before during deliveries, a place she remembered for its broken windows and the way its roof sagged as if under the weight of despair itself. The woman's hand tightened. "It's Mark and Brenda Wilson," she said quickly. "They keep to themselves. People stay away. But I swear there's a child in there. No one's ever seen her. Not once." Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She thanked the woman and promised to look into it, though unease curled in her stomach. Over the years, she'd encountered families living in extreme poverty, parents struggling to care for their children. But there was something different about this warning. Something that chilled her to the bone. Sarah returned to the Hope Hands van where two other volunteers, Thomas and Erica, were loading supplies. She relayed what the woman had said, and after a brief tense discussion, they decided to make a stop at the Wilson house before heading back to town. The dirt road leading there was barely a road at all, more a series of muddy tracks winding through dead fields. As the van approached, the house came into view like a specter. Its siding was gray and splintered, the porch cluttered with rusted tools and broken furniture. A few chickens scratched in the yard, though they seemed half-starved. Sarah's pulse quickened. There was something deeply wrong about the place. The air felt heavier here, colder somehow. The group climbed the creaking steps and knocked on the door. After a long pause, it opened just enough for a woman to peer through the crack. Brenda Wilson stood before them, her hair tangled, her eyes bloodshot and wild. Sarah smiled politely, offering a warm introduction and explaining they were there to deliver food and check on families before the storm. Brenda muttered thanks and tried to shut the door, but Sarah caught it with her hand, gently insisting they speak for a moment. That was when Sarah noticed a faint, sour smell seeping from inside the house. It was a smell she recognized instantly from her nursing days, the scent of unwashed bodies, sickness, and neglect. Brenda's eyes flickered nervously. "We're fine. Don't need anything," she said quickly, but Sarah's instincts screamed otherwise. She asked as casually as she could if there were children in the home. Brenda hesitated. "No children here," she replied, too fast, too rehearsed. The tension was palpable. As Sarah and Brenda spoke at the door, Thomas quietly circled to the back of the house. A few moments later, he returned, his face pale. "Sarah," he whispered urgently, "you need to see this." Sarah followed him around the side of the house. Behind the structure near a leaning shed stood a small enclosure made of wooden planks and chicken wire. At first glance, it looked like a crude animal pen. But as Sarah drew closer, she saw something that made her blood run cold. Inside the pen was a child. The girl sat curled in the corner, her knees drawn to her chest. She was covered in filth, her hair matted and crawling with lice. Her skin was stretched tight over sharp bones, her clothes nothing more than torn rags. A foul stench rose from the ground, thick with the smell of human waste. Sarah gasped, her hands flying to her mouth. The child lifted her head at the sound. Her eyes, large, hollow, and filled with terror, locked onto Sarah's. The look in them was not merely fear, it was the look of a creature that had been broken, stripped of trust and hope. "Oh, dear God," Sarah breathed. When Sarah tried to open the gate, the girl let out a strangled cry, scrambling backward, her limbs trembling violently. She pressed herself into the corner, shaking her head as if begging for mercy. "It's okay, sweetheart," Sarah whispered, fighting to keep her voice calm and soothing. "We're here to help you. You're safe now." The girl, Lily, did not understand. She shrieked, clawing at the dirt like a trapped animal. Sarah's heart shattered. She motioned for Thomas to call 911 while she carefully approached, speaking softly all the while. It took several agonizing minutes, but finally Sarah managed to gather the child into her arms. Lily's body was so light it felt like carrying a bundle of sticks. Her ribs pressed sharply against Sarah's chest and her skin was icy cold. As Sarah carried Lily toward the van, Brenda appeared screaming incoherently, trying to block their way. Mark Wilson emerged from the shadows, his face twisted with rage. Thomas stepped between them, his voice firm and commanding. "Back off! The police are on their way!" The couple froze, realization dawning. Brenda crumpled to the ground, wailing, while Mark cursed and spat before retreating into the house. Tate. The drive to the hospital was a blur. Sarah sat in the back of the van, holding Lily tightly against her chest, murmuring words of comfort. The child whimpered and twitched her eyes, darting wildly as if expecting another blow to fall. When they arrived at St. Mary's Pediatric Hospital, doctors and nurses rushed to meet them. Lily was whisked away on a stretcher, her frail body surrounded by a flurry of medical professionals. Sarah stood frozen in the hallway, watching through the glass as the monitors were attached, IV lines inserted and blood drawn. The lead physician emerged a few minutes later, his face grim. "She's severely malnourished," he explained, his tone clinical but tinged with anger. "Her weight is far below average for her age. There are old fractures that healed improperly, and signs of prolonged neglect. If she had been left there much longer, she wouldn't have survived." Sarah felt her knees buckle. Thomas caught her by the shoulders, steadying her. The physician continued, "We also discovered a congenital heart defect. She'll need specialized care immediately, and—" He hesitated before adding softly, "She doesn't speak. Whether from trauma or lack of exposure, we won't know until further evaluation." Sarah nodded numbly, her heart breaking anew. Later that night, Sarah returned to Lily's room. The child lay in a hospital bed hooked up to monitors, her small chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. She stared blankly at the ceiling, unblinking. Sarah sat beside her, gently brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Lily," she whispered, tasting the name for the first time. "That's what I'll call you. A lily grows in the mud, but it still blossoms pure and beautiful. That's who you are, sweetheart. You're going to bloom no matter what." Tears blurred her vision. Sarah made a silent vow in that moment she would not abandon this child. She would fight for her, heal her, and give her the life she deserved. Far away, sirens echoed in the night as police cars approached the Wilson home. The storm was only beginning. If you believe every child deserves safety and love, and you want to follow Lily's journey as she heals and grows, don't forget to subscribe and stay with us for the next chapter. The sterile white walls of St. Mary's Pediatric Hospital carried the faint scent of antiseptic, and something heavier, an unspoken tension that lingered in every corner. In one quiet room, far removed from the bustling nurses' station, Lily lay on a narrow bed, her body dwarfed by the crisp sheets and humming machines surrounding her. Sarah sat by her side, her hands folded tightly in her lap. She hadn't left the room since the night they brought Lily here. Every rise and fall of the little girl's chest felt like a fragile miracle. The doctors worked tirelessly, hydrating Lily, feeding her through tubes, treating the infections that had spread silently through her malnourished body. Progress was painfully slow. Each day felt like a delicate balancing act between life and death. Lily did not cry. She did not speak. She did not even flinch when nurses pricked her tiny arm with needles. Her eyes remained distant, as though her spirit hovered somewhere far beyond the walls of this room. For Sarah, it was both heartbreaking and terrifying. She whispered to Lily every night, telling her stories about flowers and sunlight, about laughter and kindness. Even if Lily didn't understand the words, Sarah hoped the gentleness of her voice might somehow reach her. News of Lily's rescue spread through Ashwick like wildfire. By the following morning, headlines screamed across local newspapers and social media feeds, 8-year-old found caged in horrific neglect case. Television crews descended on the small town, their cameras capturing every broken window and muddy path leading to the Wilson home. Outside St. Mary's, reporters gathered like vultures, desperate for any scrap of information. The community was divided. Many were outraged, demanding justice and harsh punishment for Mark and Brenda Wilson. Candlelight vigils were held for Lily, with neighbors leaving stuffed animals and flowers at the hospital entrance. Donations poured in from across the state, funding Lily's medical care and future therapy. But there were others who muttered about government interference, insisting that Mark and Brenda were just victims of poverty. Sarah avoided the news entirely. She didn't want Lily's pain to become a spectacle. She shielded the child from flashing cameras and harsh voices guarding her privacy like a lioness. "This isn't about politics," she told the hospital staff quietly. "This is about a little girl who's been through hell. She deserves peace." Still, she couldn't stop the tidal wave of public opinion. Lily's face, pale and fragile, became a symbol, and with that came a storm Sarah couldn't control. Geared. Meanwhile, Child Protective Services (CPS) began their investigation. Agents interviewed neighbors, combed through records, and pieced together the timeline of Lily's life, or rather her captivity. The picture that emerged was grim. Lily had been a healthy toddler once. At 2 years old, she was seen playing in the yard, babbling like any child her age. But after a particularly harsh winter, she vanished from public view. No doctor visits, no daycare enrollments, no school records. It was as if she had ceased to exist. Witnesses reported hearing muffled cries late at night. Some saw bruises on Brenda's arms, signs of domestic violence, but no one intervened. Fear kept the neighbors silent. Mark was known to be volatile, quick to anger, and prone to drunken outbursts. As investigators dug deeper, they learned that Brenda had struggled with postpartum depression after Lily's birth. Without treatment, her mental state deteriorated. She began to view Lily not as a child, but as a burden. Over time, neglect gave way to outright cruelty. Mark, meanwhile, saw opportunity. He realized that by keeping Lily hidden and pitiable, he could exploit charitable donations. Friends and relatives who visited were shown glimpses of a sickly child, prompting them to leave cash or gifts. The truth was worse than anyone imagined. Lily had been imprisoned for 6 years, treated like a prop in a twisted scheme of manipulation and greed. Back at the hospital, Sarah's focus remained on Lily's recovery. She began learning the intricacies of trauma care, working closely with specialists who taught her how to comfort a child whose trust had been shattered. Lily remained silent, but subtle changes began to emerge. On the 5th night, when Sarah hummed a lullaby, Lily's gaze shifted ever so slightly toward her. It was the first sign of recognition, and it nearly brought Sarah to tears. Sarah introduced small objects to Lily, a soft stuffed rabbit, a picture book with bright illustrations. At first, Lily ignored them. Then, one morning, Sarah found Lily clutching the rabbit tightly to her chest. It was a breakthrough as profound as a spoken word. The doctors encouraged Sarah to begin fostering simple interactions, pointing to colors, mimicking gestures, celebrating even the tiniest responses. Each small victory filled Sarah with hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where Lily might laugh, play, and speak again. "You are safe now," Sarah whispered one evening, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. "No one will ever hurt you again." While Sarah focused on healing a darker storm brewed outside the hospital walls. Mark Wilson, from his jail cell, hired a defense attorney with a reputation for exploiting legal loopholes. His strategy was simple: claim ignorance and poverty, paint himself and Brenda as misunderstood victims. The attorney argued that Lily's condition was the result of systemic failure, not malicious intent. He hinted that Sarah, as an outsider, was interfering for personal gain, seeking attention and donations. This narrative gained traction among a small but vocal group of supporters. Online forums buzzed with conspiracy theories. Some accused CPS of kidnapping Lily. Others claimed Sarah was exaggerating the abuse to build her reputation. Sarah didn't care about gossip, but the legal implications terrified her. She had been granted temporary custody of Lily as a foster caregiver, but it wasn't permanent. Mark could technically petition the court for visitation rights or worse to regain custody. The thought made Sarah physically ill. Late at night, she sat by Lily's bed watching the child sleep. The soft beeping of monitors was the only sound. "I won't let him take you back," she vowed silently, "even if it means fighting with everything I have." As tensions rose, the Hope Hands Foundation organized a fundraiser for Lily's ongoing care. The event drew hundreds, filling a local gymnasium with people holding candles and offering prayers. Sarah spoke briefly, her voice steady but emotional. Lily represents so many children who are hidden away, unseen, and unheard. This is our chance to make sure she and others like her never go through this again. The response was overwhelming. Donations flowed in from across the state, enough to cover Lily's medical expenses and therapy for months to come. If you believe in giving every child a second chance, subscribe to our channel to follow Lily's progress and join a growing community dedicated to protecting children everywhere. 2 weeks after her rescue, Lily made her first sound. Sarah was reading softly from a picture book when she heard it, a faint, halting syllable. At first, she thought she imagined it, but then it came again, fragile and trembling. Mom. Sarah's breath caught. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she gathered Lily into her arms. "Yes, sweetheart. I'm here. I'm your mom now." It wasn't just a word. It was a declaration, a bridge across the chasm of silence and fear. From that moment, Lily's progress accelerated. She began to respond to simple questions with nods or single sounds. She accepted food from Sarah's hand. She even laughed once, a small, startled giggle that felt like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. But, just as hope blossomed, Mark's legal maneuvering intensified. His attorney filed motions challenging CPS's actions, demanding a court hearing to determine custody. It was a nightmare, Sarah had feared from the beginning. The upcoming trial would determine Lily's future. If the court sided with Mark, Lily could be forced back into the very environment that had nearly destroyed her. Sarah knew she couldn't fight alone. She hired her own attorney, a compassionate woman named Rachel Owens, who specialized in child welfare cases. Together, they prepared for a battle that would test not only the strength of the law, but the resilience of Sarah's love. On the eve of the hearing, Sarah sat by Lily's bed, stroking her hair. The child slept peacefully, clutching the stuffed rabbit to her chest. Outside the window, the first snowflakes of winter drifted silently to the ground. The storm was coming, both literal and figurative. Sarah whispered into the quiet room a promise and a prayer. "Whatever happens, I will fight for you. I will never let the darkness take you again. This fight is only beginning. If you want to witness Lily's journey and stand beside Sarah as she battles for justice, subscribe now and help us bring awareness to children who cannot speak for themselves." The courthouse in Ashwick stood like a relic from another time, its brick walls weathered, its tall windows fogged with condensation on the cold winter morning. The building had seen its share of disputes over farmland debts and family feuds, but never had it witnessed a case like this. By dawn, a crowd had gathered on the courthouse steps. Some carried signs demanding justice for Lily. Others muttered angrily about government overreach. News vans lined the street, satellite dishes pointed skyward as reporters prepared to broadcast every development. Inside, the air was thick with tension. Sarah sat in a wooden bench near the front, her hands clasped tightly together. Lily was not in the courtroom yet. She remained in a quiet room with a child psychologist, protected from the chaos outside. Sarah's attorney, Rachel Owens, leaned close. "Remember, To stay calm, she murmured. Our goal is to keep the focus on Lily's well-being. No matter what lies they throw at us, we hold steady. Sarah nodded, though her stomach churned. This day would decide everything. If they lost, Lily could be taken back to the people who had hurt her. The thought was unbearable. Judge Eleanor Whitfield, a stern woman with silver hair and piercing eyes, entered the courtroom. The gavel struck once, echoing like a gunshot. "This court will come to order," she announced. Mark Wilson sat at the defense table, his shoulders squared, his jaw tight. Beside him, his attorney, a slick man named Victor Caldwell, projected an air of calm confidence. Brenda sat a few feet away, her hands trembling, her eyes vacant and glassy. Victor rose first, addressing the judge and jury. "Ladies and gentlemen, what we have here is a tragic misunderstanding," he began smoothly. "My clients are not monsters. They are victims of poverty, of a broken system that offered no help. The state has twisted their hardships into a tale of cruelty when, in truth, they simply lacked resources and guidance." His words dripped with false sympathy. He gestured toward Sarah. "And this woman, while I do not doubt her good intentions, has inserted herself into their lives, turning this into a spectacle for her own gain. We must ask ourselves, is this about Lily's best interest or about appearances and control?" Sarah's breath caught anger flaring in her chest. She wanted to shout to protest, but Rachel placed a calming hand on her arm. When it was their turn, Rachel stood, her voice steady and resolute. "This case is not about poverty. It is about choice. Mark and Brenda Wilson did not simply struggle. They chose to confine their daughter in filth and darkness for 6 years. They had access to help and refused it. They had neighbors willing to step in, and they turned them away. The evidence will show deliberate, sustained abuse." The first battle lines were drawn. The prosecution presented their case methodically, piece by devastating piece. Photographs of the makeshift cage where Lily had been kept. Medical records documenting old fractures, untreated infections, and extreme malnutrition. Testimonies from neighbors who had heard cries in the night but had been too afraid to intervene. Each revelation struck the courtroom like a hammer blow. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the audience. Sarah sat motionless, her hands clenched in her lap. She couldn't bear to look at the photos of the cage for long, but she forced herself to endure it for Lily. When the doctors testified, their voices were clinical but heavy with suppressed emotion. "This level of neglect is not accidental," one physician stated. "It is systemic, deliberate. Lily's condition reflects years of deprivation." Victor cross-examined fiercely, attempting to sow doubt. He hinted that injuries could have come from accidental falls, that malnutrition might be due to food insecurity. He even implied that Sarah's testimony was biased because of her personal grief over losing her own daughter. Rachel countered with precision, dismantling each argument. She produced records of community programs the Wilsons had refused, donations they had misused, and witnesses who saw Mark buying alcohol instead of food. The courtroom became a battleground of words and evidence. The moment everyone had dreaded finally arrived. The door at the side of the courtroom opened, and Lily entered, escorted by a child psychologist. She clutched her stuffed rabbit tightly, her small frame trembling. The room fell silent. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. She wanted to run to Lily to scoop her up and shield her from the staring eyes, but she stayed rooted to her seat. Lily was seated gently in a special chair near the judge's bench. The psychologist knelt beside her, speaking softly. At first, Lily would not raise her head, but when the psychologist pointed to Sarah, Lily's eyes flickered with recognition. She whispered one word, barely audible, "Mom." A collective gasp swept through the courtroom. Sarah pressed her hand to her mouth, tears spilling freely. Even the judge's stern expression softened for a brief moment. Rachel approached carefully, asking simple, gentle questions. "Lily, do you feel safe with Sarah?" A tiny nod. "Do you want to go back to the house where you were before?" Lily's body tensed. Her breathing quickened. She clutched the rabbit so tightly her knuckles turned white. Then, with a broken cry, she shook her head violently, hiding her face. That silent refusal spoke louder than any words could. Victor Caldwell wasn't finished. When it was his turn, he leaned heavily on theatrics. He presented photos of the Wilson home taken years ago showing a modest but tidy household. He brought forward a former neighbor who claimed Mark had once given him firewood during a hard winter, painting him as a man of quiet generosity. Then came the cruelest blow. Victor produced edited video clips implying that Sarah was using Lily for online fundraising, suggesting she had financial motives for keeping the child. The jury shifted uneasily. Whispers filled the room. Sarah's heart pounded. She wanted to scream the truth, but Rachel rose with calm fury. She exposed the footage as doctored, presenting unaltered recordings and testimony from Hope Hands Foundation, verifying every dollar of donations. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. Sarah could feel it, a cold weight pressing down. When the time came for final statements, Victor painted a picture of tragedy, not crime. "This is not a case of evil," he intoned solemnly. "It is a case of desperation. Sending these parents to prison will solve nothing. Lily needs her family, not strangers." Rachel's closing words were stark and unwavering. Family is not defined by blood, but by love and protection. Mark and Brenda Wilson had 6 years to show love, and instead they chose control and cruelty. Lily has found safety with Sarah. Do not send her back to darkness. The jury deliberated for 3 tense hours. Sarah sat rigid, her hands clasped, whispering silent prayers. Finally, the jurors returned. The foreperson stood holding a slip of paper. "On the charge of child abuse, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of false imprisonment, we find the defendants guilty. On the charge of neglect, resulting in severe harm, we find the defendants guilty." Brenda collapsed in tears. Mark's face twisted with rage. The judge's gavel fell. "Mark and Brenda Wilson are hereby sentenced to 20 years in state prison. Furthermore, their parental rights are permanently terminated. Custody of the minor Lily Wilson is awarded to Sarah Miller." The courtroom erupted. Reporters' scrambled cameras flashed. Sarah covered her face, sobbing with relief. Lily, confused by the noise, reached for her. Sarah scooped her up, holding her close as tears mingled with Lily's soft hair. In the days following the trial, Ashwick slowly returned to its quiet rhythm. The Wilson house was boarded up, a grim reminder of what had been uncovered. Sarah focused on Lily's healing. With the legal battle behind them, they could finally build a life together without fear of it being ripped away. One evening, as snow fell outside their small home, Lily sat on Sarah's lap, tracing the pages of a picture book. She spoke softly, haltingly, forming a new word: safe. Sarah hugged her tightly. "Yes, sweetheart. Safe." Though Mark and Brenda were behind bars, Sarah knew the fight for children like Lily was far from over. She partnered with Hope Hands Foundation to raise awareness, determined that no other child would endure what Lily had suffered. As they prepared to speak at a statewide conference, Sarah recorded a message. "Lily's story isn't over. Her journey has just begun. If you want to continue following her path to healing and to stand with us as we protect vulnerable children everywhere, subscribe and join our mission." Winter in Ashwick was a quiet, almost solemn season. Snow blanketed the worn streets and empty fields, softening the sharp edges of a town that had seen too much pain. The courthouse steps, once crowded with protesters and reporters, now lay silent beneath a layer of frost. In a small house on the edge of town, Sarah Miller rose before dawn. She moved quietly through the rooms, careful not to wake Lily, who slept curled beneath a quilt stitched with care by members of the Hope Hands Foundation. The legal battle was over. Mark and Brenda were gone, serving their sentences in a distant state prison. The cage where Lily had once been imprisoned had been dismantled and burned, leaving only ash and a scar. But for Sarah and Lily, the true journey was. Sarah tiptoed into Lily's room and found her sitting up, the stuffed rabbit cluck. Lily's eyes lit up when she saw Sarah. She didn't speak right away, words were still difficult, but she offered a shy smile. It was a small thing, a brief curve of her lips, yet to Sarah it was proof of a miracle. They had built routines together, fragile bridges toward normalcy. Mornings began with warm oatmeal and soft music. Afternoons were spent at therapy sessions where Lily practiced motor skills, learned to recognize colors, and was gently guided through the basics of speech. Progress was slow, like watching a flower unfurl one petal at a time. Some days, Lily would retreat into silence, her body trembling with old fears. Other days, she surprised everyone with sudden breakthroughs, a new word spoken. The first time she said safe, Sarah had to step into another room and cry silently, overwhelmed by the weight of that single word. Venturing outside was another challenge. The first trip to the park had been overwhelming for Lily. The open sky seemed to terrify her at first, a vastness she couldn't comprehend after years of confinement. She clung to Sarah's coat, eyes wide, breathing rapid. But then a dog bounded past, wagging its tail. Lily's fear eased slightly. She reached out one tentative hand to touch the animal's fur. It was her first interaction with another living being besides Sarah, and it marked a turning point. Week by week, Lily began to explore the world. She learned the texture of grass beneath her fingers, the sound of birds overhead, the warmth of sunlight on her face. Each discovery was a revelation. For Sarah, these moments were bittersweet. She rejoiced in Lily's growth, yet mourned the years that had been stolen. Childhood should have been filled with such wonders, not locked away in darkness. The people of Ashwick rallied around Lily. Volunteers from Hope Hands Foundation brought books, toys, and meals. Therapists donated their time. Even strangers sent letters of encouragement. Sarah was deeply moved by this wave of compassion. One evening, she addressed a small gathering at the local community center. Lily sat quietly beside her, holding the stuffed rabbit. "When we found Lily," Sarah began, her voice steady but tinged with emotion. She had been silenced in every way that matters. Today, she is beginning to find her voice again. This is not just her victory, it is ours. It shows what can happen when a community refuses to look away. The room erupted in applause, not just for Sarah's words, but for Lily's courage. Final call to action number 1. If you believe in giving every child a chance to heal, please subscribe and follow Lily's journey as we continue to bring awareness and hope to those still living in the shadows. Late at night, when the house was quiet, Sarah often found herself reflecting on the path that had brought them here. She thought of her own daughter gone too soon, and how fate had somehow placed Lily in her arms. There were moments when grief and gratitude mingled until she couldn't tell them apart. Sometimes Sarah felt unworthy of the role she had taken on. The weight of responsibility was immense. But then she would remember the way Lily had whispered Mom during the trial, and her resolve would return. She knew there would be challenges ahead, school enrollments, therapy costs, the lingering scars of trauma. But she also knew that love could rebuild what cruelty had destroyed. Though Mark and Brenda were imprisoned, Sarah couldn't entirely escape their shadow. Letters arrived occasionally from Brenda, written in shaky handwriting, alternating between apologies and incomprehensible ramblings. Mark, on the other hand, remained silent. His absence was almost more unsettling than his words would have been. Sarah kept the letters locked away unread by Lily. One day, when Lily was older and stronger, Sarah would decide whether to show them. For now, she focused on building a future untouched by the past. On a bright spring morning, Sarah took Lily back to the park. The air was cool and clean, carrying the scent of budding flowers. Children's laughter rang out from the playground. Lily hesitated at the edge of the grass, then took a step forward, then another. Sarah held her breath, ready to run if fear overtook her, but Lily kept going. Slowly, steadily, she crossed the open space and reached a small slide. She looked back at Sarah, eyes questioning. Sarah smiled and nodded. Lily climbed the steps, slid down, and landed with a soft thud. She let out a startled giggle, the sound of pure, unguarded joy. It was her first true laugh. Sarah felt tears sting her eyes. "You're free now, sweetheart," she whispered, "and you'll never go back." As the sun set that evening, Sarah sat with Lily on a park bench. The sky blazed with orange and gold. Lily leaned against Sarah's side, humming softly to herself. Sarah looked down at the child who had changed her life and knew this was only the beginning. Lily's story is not finished, she said quietly, almost as if speaking to the wind. Every day is a new chapter. There will be setbacks and there will be triumphs, but she will never walk this road alone. The screen fades to black, leaving only Sarah's voice. If you want to continue walking beside Lily, if you want to witness her healing and help other children like her, leave a comment below. Share your thoughts, your hopes, and your support. Together, we can be the light that guides them home. Subscribe now to follow Lily's journey and ensure no child's voice goes unheard. A final montage plays. Lily drawing colorful pictures at a small desk. Sarah teaching her how to bake cookies in the kitchen. The Hope Hands Foundation opening a new outreach center named Lily's Place. The last image lingers on Lily standing in a field of wildflowers, sunlight streaming over her face. She turns, lifts her hand in a small wave and smiles. The screen fades to black with simple text, "Her journey continues." Join us in the next chapter. Subscribe, comment, and be part of a community that believes in hope, healing, and second chances.